What's up? Travel Chronicles, Chapter 107, Subset B, on the way to the basketball game. So I got some time. And what I wanted to talk about was the other part of my conversation from earlier. Maybe I didn't post. I'm going to post this one because I'm talking about fourth dimension, right? The fourth dimension. And if you're curious, it's not time. Time is not the fourth dimension. And I know there's some, Einstein got into space-time. I'm not talking about mixing 3 dimensions with time and calling that 4 dimensions. I'm talking about straight 4 dimensions. In the absence of movement, chemical reactions, whatever, everything's completely, perfectly still. Time wouldn't exist, right? So when that happens, you still have 1 dimension, right? A line. You have 2 dimensions, the X, Y. Then you have 3 dimensions. Some odd combination of X, Y, and up and down. And conceptually, when I've looked at some other videos, I've watched some other videos, and it's something that kind of keeps coming up, and I could push it away. And lately, I've been thinking about it more and more. It's like, how does that work? How does the 4th dimension work? How do we get to the 4th dimension? How do we see it? Could we use the 4th dimension for something? And just so we're all on the same page, I'll go to the elementary explanation that I've seen on the internet and a lot of YouTube channels. And probably the best one was a Carl Sagan explanation, even though he wasn't quite right in my opinion. And if you think of, let's go through the dimensions, right? 1 dimension is a line. So if you're on said line, you can only see down the line, right, or back, right? And it's a dot, right? That's all you can see in the dimension. Would just be something, right? I'm not even sure how that would work, right? In 2 dimensions, you could see a line, right? So if you're a 2-dimensional being, and it's called flatland, right, is where you would live, then you can perceive 1 dimension, right? Just a line on the horizon, and that's cool. That's cool. But if you take Flatlander man, and let's say he's a square, circle, whatever, and he's moving around this flatland, and all of a sudden 3D man lands in flatland. Well, he can't see 3D man. He can only perceive in that narrow band that exists in flatland, right? The line on the horizon. So all he would see is like two little dots. And this 3D man is talking, telling him about the 3rd dimension and what it looks like, and 2D man doesn't understand because he lives in 2 dimensions and he just sees 2 dots talking to him. So maybe 3D man settles down and he can perceive different parts of him entering flatland. That's it. Can't see all of it. Just parts of it. Well, if you take Flatlander, so 3D man gets frustrated trying to describe it. He's like, okay, let me take you into the 3rd dimension. So he takes Flatland man and he picks him up. And Flatland man doesn't understand up, right? Can't perceive up and down. Can still just see in his line. And let's say he drops Flatland man down back in Flatland. But now where he picked him up drops him over somewhere else, so he lands in between other Flatlanders. One, when he appears to other Flatlanders, he just would appear. Okay, because their sight line, they can't see up, they just see when something enters. So he would enter like that. 2, and Carl Sagan describes it as when Flatlander man is floating, he's perceiving all of Flatlands below him. And then when he lands amongst the other flatlanders, like, how'd you get here? He can't describe it because up doesn't exist, right? Up and down doesn't exist. But in my opinion, the example here is not quite right, because Flatlander man wouldn't be able to perceive up and down still. He would just be perceiving in a small band that's maybe rotating back and forth like this. If he's going like this, if he's in this up and down motion, he's never been in it before. But he can't perceive it. He can just see swaths of flatland as he's dropping, and maybe further down flatland and right below him, and but he conceptually doesn't understand. And the whole time he's dropping, this view is changing until eventually he lands, and now he's in flatland again, and everything looks the same as it did. But he can't describe up because he doesn't have that motion, and I don't know that he would be able to really conceptualize up or the drop, this change in height, because it's not something anybody has ever experienced in flat. Now, if you take that same concept and say, okay, 3D man, if four-dimensional man comes into your world, what does he look like? Don't know, right? If a four-dimensional being existed here, theoretically would have only be able to see 3 dimensionals of him or her. Gender exists in the 4th dimension. So we're only able to see that certain, and here's the other odd thing, right? So 2D man only sees 1 dimension. He can only perceive the line in front of him, the horizon. An object, not an object. That would be it. In 3 dimensions, 3-dimensional objects only perceive 2 dimensions, right? I can only see height and width. I can't see 3 dimensions. If I could see 3 dimensions, I could see the back of my hand. But I can't. I can only see front, except for when I look in a mirror. Then I can perceive another dimension, but it's 2 dimensions. I don't know. I just had a thought there while I was watching my video. Interesting. Well, maybe I'll explore that. But conceptually, right, we're going to have the same problem as 2D man did trying to describe that 3rd dimension. Because 2D man couldn't point up, couldn't point down. 3D man can't point to the 4th dimension. Like, I can point over, forward, up, down, but I can't point into the 4th dimension. And that's where the hang-up is for me, because I feel like conceptually, even if I couldn't see it, even if I can't put my hands on it, can't put my hands in it, I should be able to think of that 4th dimension. Now, there are examples mathematically that they've shown, right? And the idea is, a 3-dimensional object casts a 2-dimensional shadow, right? So a 4-dimensional object would cast a 3-dimensional shadow that we could see. And the other part of this concept is, if you start 2-dimensionally, you draw a square. Take that square into 3 dimensions, it becomes a cube, right? Because now we had length, we have width, now we have depth. And we did that by expanding perpendicularly to the vertices up, and then across, the mirroring. Maybe mirroring is the key here. So once you do that, you have a 3-dimensional object. If you take the 3-dimensional object and you expand it on the vertices perpendicularly, I'm not even sure how that works, expand it out, but the object that they've come up with, at least in 3-dimensional space, of the shadow of the 4-dimensional object, is called the tesseract. It's not a Marvel cut up here. That's what it's actually called. It's a tesseract. It's a cube that lies inside of another cube. We because they've come off of the vertices of the first cube outwardly, and then there's another cube around it, and it's kind of wild looking, and I guess it makes sense, but I still don't understand the fourth dimension, right? And conceptually, to me, right, so if you go back to Flatland, and the other example we had of Flatland was where Flatland was actually on a sphere, so it's flat enough that they can't perceive the up and down, right, the horizon. They're just in it, but it actually curves, so it's flat enough or wide enough, whatever, that it curves around. So a Flatlander man goes all the way around Flatland, and he'll actually end up in the same spot where he started, because it's spherical, right, or circular, however you want to look at it. And we tend to think of things like our Earth, right, going outside our Earth, be the surface of Flatland. So what if you take Flatland and you put it inside of a cylinder instead of a sphere, inside of a sphere, and Flatland man goes around, I say cylinder just because it's easier to visualize. He goes around the cylinder and then back to the starting, up and around and back. Same thing, right? He's just traveling all line in a circle. But now the difference between this point in his journey and halfway is this distance here, right? The diameter of the circle. Or if you think of it maybe a flat oval, right? And he traveled all the way around this distance, and then it curved around, and maybe that sharp curve you're able to see if it's not a perfect sphere, so maybe it has to be a perfect sphere or a perfect cylinder or something. Whatever. The distance from here to here is going to be shorter than that distance he travels around to here to get here. Right? Because that would be D, and the circumference would be, it's half a circumference, so that would be half pi d. So yeah, that would still be normal, even if it's circular. Well, what if our environment, what if our 3D environment, and I'm talking larger than the world, I'm talking spatially, out in the universe, is curved. And where Flatland man, if he would have realized, this distance is shorter from here to here, he wouldn't have to travel all the way around the circle. He could just go in between here, right? And the more compressed it gets, then how much frustrating would it be to just go, bloop, I'm there. But he has to travel through a third dimension. He has to travel through a dimension he doesn't understand. He can't comprehend. What if our universe was like that? What if it was some twisted, mangled mess of 3 dimensions, and rather than, we can just see 2-dimensionally out into space. We can see the stars, we can see other galaxies and solar systems. What if they're actually all rolled up, and on top of us, and rather than traveling all the way out into space, we could go, across that 4th dimension to get to these other areas. I don't know. That's my thought. The other thought that I've had is I heard a lot about dark matter, and it's like 90% of the universe or whatever is dark. I don't know what percentage it is. It's some astronomical amount, right? Like we can see our physical selves, and that's regular matter, but we can't see the dark matter. We know it exists, but we can't explain it. Well, what if the dark matter was existing in a different dimension, right? So, we can kind of tell it's there, but we can't see it. We can't hold it. We can't even point to it, but we have the understanding that it's there, right? And we can see how other things have interacted and moved, and we know it's there. So that's taillights from another car. That's why I'm red. It's not all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it makes sense. No. I'm gonna have to stop because it's gonna get too dark and I'm gonna get on the interstate. But that's where I'm at conceptually. I just feel like I'm so close, but I can't quite make that next step. That may be later. Well, I'll keep thinking about it, but give you something to think about, and good luck. If you get to that fourth dimension, let me know. Look me up. Just pop in. All right. See you later.